9:17 a.m., January 22nd, 1943, Guadalcanal Island, South Pacific. Second Lieutenant John George, 27 years old, Illinois farm boy, crouches in a bombed-out Japanese bunker, sweat dripping down his temple. Through a mail-order rifle scope his fellow officers called a toy, he watches a man die. Not yet, but in 7 seconds he will. 240 yards away, 87 feet up in a banyan tree, a Japanese sniper shifts his weight. The branch moves. No wind. Just the subtle adjustment of a trained killer settling into position to take another American life. George's finger rests on the trigger. 3.5 pounds of pressure. That's all it takes. But this isn't a paper target at the Illinois State Championship. This isn't a deer in the woods back home. Through that scope, George can see the man's profile. Someone's son, maybe someone's father. The Japanese sniper raises his own rifle, scanning the American supply trail where 14 men have already died in the past 3 days. George exhales halfway, holds it, and squeezes. The body falls 90 feet, crashing through the banyan branches like a broken doll. One shot, one kill. It's the first of 11 Japanese snipers John George will eliminate in the next 4 days using a rifle the U.S. Army never wanted him to have. 6 weeks earlier, when George unpacked his Winchester Model 70 at Camp Forest, Tennessee, the company armorer asked if he was planning to hunt deer or Germans. "It's for the Japanese," George replied. The other platoon leaders laughed. They called it his mail-order sweetheart. Captain Morris ordered him to leave the sporting rifle in his tent and carry a real weapon. You see, every other man in the 132nd Infantry Regiment carried the M1 Garand, the standard issue, semi-automatic 8-round battle rifle that won the war. George's Winchester was bolt action, just 5 rounds with the civilian hunting scope he'd saved 2 years of National Guard pay to buy, $180. A fortune for a farm boy. His fellow officers thought he was crazy. The armorer thought he was naive. But the 11 Japanese snipers who'd been killing Americans with impunity in the Point Cruz groves, they were about to discover something those officers didn't know. John George wasn't just good with a rifle. At 23, he'd become the youngest Illinois state champion in history, putting 6-inch groups at 1,000 yards with iron sights. And that toy scope, it was about to change modern warfare. But here's what George didn't know that morning as he settled into that bunker. Those 11 Japanese snipers weren't random soldiers. They were trained specialists who'd been operating in the Pacific Theater since 1938. They knew these jungles. They knew how to wait. They knew how to kill. In the 72 hours before George was summoned, they'd killed 14 Americans, shot Corporal Daniel Davis while he filled his canteen at a creek, killed 2 men from L Company during a routine patrol, put a bullet through Private Wilson's neck from a tree his squad had walked past twice. The battalion commander was desperate. His men were dying faster than malaria could take them. So on the night of January 21st, he summoned the young lieutenant with the mail-order rifle and asked one simple question: can that thing actually hit anything? What happened next would prove that sometimes the weapon everyone laughs at is exactly the weapon you need. But first, George had to do something he'd never done before. He had to kill a man. This is the true story of how a farm boy from Illinois with a rifle the Army didn't want became one of the most effective snipers in the Pacific War, how he cleared the Point Cruz groves in 4 days when an entire battalion couldn't do it in 2 weeks, how he trained 40 more men who killed 74 enemy soldiers with 0 friendly casualties, and how his privately purchased Winchester Model 70 changed the way the United States military thought about precision marksmanship forever. If you or someone you love served in the Pacific during World War II, you know these stories matter. These men, the ones who did extraordinary things with ordinary tools, they deserve to be remembered. So do me a favor, hit that like button right now. Every like tells YouTube to share this story with more people, and hit subscribe. We're rescuing forgotten stories like this from dusty archives every single day. Now let me tell you about the rifle. And the man who refused to leave it behind. Summer 1939, Camp Perry, Ohio. 23-year-old John George lies prone on the 1,000-yard line, squinting through iron sights at a target the size of a dinner plate. The sun beats down on his back. Sweat stings his eyes. His pulse thuds in his ears. 72 beats per minute, same as always. He's competing against men twice his age. Veterans. Professional marksmen. Men who've been shooting competitively since before John was born. The wind shifts 5 miles per hour left to right. John adjusts his Kentucky windage, a tiny movement of the sights muscle memory from 1,000 practice sessions on his father's farm. Inhale, exhale halfway, hold, squeeze, SFX single rifle shot, then silence. The spotter raises the flag, center mass, again. When the smoke clears and the scores are tallied, John George, skinny farm kid from rural Illinois, has won the state championship with 6-inch groups at 1,000 yards, youngest winner in Illinois history. The trophy sits on his mantelpiece for exactly 3 months before he enlists in the National Guard. Not because war has started, it hasn't, not for America. but because John George knows something the rest of the country doesn't want to believe yet. War is coming, and when it does, men who can shoot will be needed. So he starts saving $2 here, $5 there. National Guard pay isn't much, but it's enough. He orders a Winchester Model 70 from the catalog, bolt action .30-06 caliber. Then he adds a Lyman Alaskan 2.5 times scope and a Griffin and Howe mount. Total cost $180. His father thinks he's wasted the money. Son, if there's a war, the Army will give you a rifle. John just smiles. Not like this one, Dad. 4:30 to 5:45. December 1942. The Mockery. Visual Military Training Camp troops boarding ships. George packing footlocker. SFX. Drill sergeants shouting, trucks rumbling. December 1942. Camp Forest, Tennessee. The 132nd Infantry Regiment is preparing to ship out to the Pacific Theater. John George now. The Second Lieutenant George unpacks his Winchester in the company barracks. The company armorer takes one look at it and frowns. What's this, Lieutenant? You planning to hunt deer out there? It's for the Japanese, George replies quietly. The armorer laughs. So do the other officers. See, every other man in that regiment carries an M1 Garand, 9.5 pounds semi-automatic, 8-round en-bloc clip. It's the most advanced infantry rifle in the world. General Patton calls it the greatest implement of battle ever devised. George's Winchester, it's a hunting rifle. Bolt action means he has to manually cycle the action between shots. 5 rounds instead of 8. And that scope that Lyman Alaskan, it only has 2.5 times magnification. Not exactly cutting-edge military technology. Captain Richard Morris summons George to his tent. Lieutenant, I'm going to make this simple. You leave that sporting rifle here and carry a real weapon, or you don't deploy with this company. George nods. Yes, sir. Then he packs the Winchester in his footlocker anyway and ships it to his parents' address in Illinois. He'll have it sent to him once they establish a supply line in the Pacific. The 132nd Infantry ships out 3 days later. George carries a standard issue M1 Garand, same as everyone else, but that Winchester, it's coming eventually. What George doesn't know yet is that by the time his rifle arrives, 14 Americans will be dead, and the battalion commander will be desperate enough to let a lieutenant with a toy scope prove what he can do. But first, George has to survive the bloodiest 16 days of fighting on Guadalcanal. About 5:45 to 7 o'clock. Late December 1942, arrival, visual troops wading ashore, jungle terrain, Henderson Field, music tents building. Late December 1942, the 132nd Infantry Regiment arrives at Guadalcanal to relieve the Marines who've been fighting since August. The Marines have taken Henderson Field, the strategic airstrip that controls the South Pacific. They've held it through hell itself, but they haven't taken Mount Austin, and they haven't cleared the Japanese from the coastal groves west of the Matanakayu River. That's the 132nd's job now. Mount Austin stands 1,514 feet tall. The Japanese call it the Gifu. 500 Japanese soldiers dug into 47 fortified bunkers. George's battalion attacks on December 17th. They fight for 16 days straight, hand to hand in the bunkers, grenades, flamethrowers, bayonets. The jungle floor turns to mud, not from rain, but from blood. Casualties, 34 killed in action. 279 wounded. George fights alongside his men, M1 Garand in hand. That Winchester still, sitting in a warehouse in Illinois. On January 2nd, 1943, the 132nd finally takes the western slope of Mount Austin. The cost has been devastating. And in all those 16 days of brutal combat, Second Lieutenant John George has fired his prized Winchester Model 70 exactly 0 times. He starts to wonder if his father was right, if maybe he did waste $180 on a rifle that doesn't belong in modern warfare. Then 6 days later, a supply sergeant hands him a wooden crate marked fragile. Inside is the Winchester. And 3 weeks after that, George will use it to do something no one thought possible. But first, 11 Japanese snipers need to teach the U.S. Army a lesson about what happens when you underestimate the enemy. January 19th, 1943. Point Cruz Groves, western Guadalcanal. The 132nd Infantry has pushed west from Mount Austin into the coconut plantations and jungle groves along the coast. This should be easier than bunker assaults. Open terrain, clear sight lines. Instead, it's a nightmare. The Japanese have retreated into the massive trees, banyan trees that grow 90 feet tall with trunks 8 feet thick. And up in those trees, invisible from the ground, are snipers. Not regular infantry, specialists. They have scoped Arisaka Type 98 rifles. They've been trained in camouflage and concealment since before the war started. Some of them have been operating in jungle terrain since China in 1938, and they know how to wait. January 19th, 0830 hours, Corporal Daniel Davis walks to a creek to fill canteens for his squad. 22 years old from Oklahoma, married 6 months before deployment. His wife, Sarah, is pregnant. He got the letter 2 weeks ago. He kneels by the water. The shot comes from somewhere in the trees. Daniel never hears it. January 20th, 1400 hours. A patrol from L Company sweeps through the same grove. Two men fall within 30 seconds of each other. Different shooters, different trees. The patrol returns fire blindly into the canopy, wasting ammunition on shadows. 0 enemy casualties. January 21st morning. 3 more Americans die. One of them is Private James Wilson. Shot through the neck from a tree his squad had walked past twice. The Japanese sniper had climbed into position during the night and waited completely motionless for 7 hours until Wilson's squad returned on their morning patrol. Battalion intelligence pieces together the pattern. 11 Japanese snipers operating in the Point Cruz groves. They work in pairs, 1 shooter, 1 spotter. They climb before dawn and stay in position all day without moving. They know which trails the Americans use. They know the patrol schedules. And in 72 hours, they've killed 14 men from the 132nd Infantry Regiment. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Henry Wilson, has a problem. His men are terrified. They're bunching up on patrols instead of spreading out properly, making themselves even better targets. Morale is collapsing. He needs those snipers eliminated. But how? You can't assault a sniper position 90 feet up in a tree with grenades or bayonets. Artillery is useless in dense jungle. You're as likely to kill your own men as the enemy. And the standard M1 Garand, for all its virtues, doesn't have optics. Without magnification, you can't even see the snipers, let alone shoot them. Wilson needs a counter sniper. Someone who can hunt the hunters, someone who can shoot. January 21st, 10 o'clock p.m. Second Lieutenant John George sits in his tent, cleaning his M1 Garand by lantern light. His Winchester Model 70, the one that arrived 3 weeks ago, leans against his footlocker untouched. He's carried it on 2 patrols, but Captain Morris's words still echo, "Leave the sporting rifle in your tent." A runner appears at the tent flap. "Lieutenant George, Colonel Wilson wants to see you now." George's stomach drops. In the middle of the night, a summons from the battalion commander means one of 2 things: you're in serious trouble or something terrible has happened. He walks to the headquarters tent, wondering which it is. Inside, Colonel Wilson stands over a map of the Point Cruz groves, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Captain Morris is there too, looking uncomfortable. Wilson doesn't waste time on pleasantries. "Lieutenant, your fellow officers tell me you can shoot. State champion or something like that." "True. Yes, sir. Illinois state champion 1939, 1,000-yard iron sights." Wilson studies George for a long moment. "And you have some kind of special rifle, with a scope." George glances at Captain Morris, who's carefully looking at the map. "Yes, sir. Winchester Model 70, with a Lyman Alaskan scope, 2.5 times magnification. I can put 5 rounds in a 4-inch group at 300 yards. Can you shoot a man out of a tree at 200 yards? The question hangs in the air. George has never shot a man. Not yet, but he knows the truthful answer. "Yes, sir, I can." Wilson taps the map. "We have 11 Japanese snipers killing my men in these groves, 14 casualties in 3 days. I need them eliminated yesterday." He looks George directly in the eyes. "You have until tomorrow morning to prove that mail-order rifle of yours is worth a damn. If you can't, you leave it in your tent, and we try something else. Are we clear? Crystal clear, sir? Good. Morris will get you positioned before dawn. Dismissed." George walks back to his tent in the dark. The jungle is alive with sound insects, distant artillery, the occasional crack of a rifle somewhere down the line. He sits on his cot with the Winchester across his lap. Tomorrow morning, he'll look through that Lyman Alaskan scope and see a human being, not a paper target, not a deer, a man, someone's son, maybe someone's father, and George will have to pull the trigger. Can he do it? He thinks about Corporal Davis shot while filling canteens, about Private Wilson killed by a sniper who'd waited 7 hours for the perfect shot, about the 14 Americans who'll never go home because 11 Japanese soldiers are very, very good at their jobs. Can he kill a man? The question keeps him awake until 3 a.m. At 3:01, he decides the answer doesn't matter. His brothers in arms are dying, that's what matters. He field strips the Winchester, cleans every component with gun oil checks, the scope mounts, loads, 5 rounds of .30-06 hunting ammunition, and tries to sleep. He fails. At 5:30 a.m., before dawn light touches the horizon, Second Lieutenant John George picks up his Winchester Model 70 and goes to war. January 22nd, 1943, 5:30 a.m., George moves through the pre-dawn darkness to a bombed-out Japanese bunker his battalion captured 3 days earlier. The position overlooks the coconut groves west of Point Cruz, exactly where the snipers have been operating. He travels alone. No spotter, no radio man, no backup. "I work better alone," he'd told Captain Morris. The truth is simpler. If this fails, George doesn't want anyone else's career damaged by association with the lieutenant and his toy rifle. The bunker provides good cover and an elevated angle into the grove. George settles in, arranges his equipment, Winchester 60 rounds and stripper clips, canteen field glasses. Then he waits for daylight. The jungle smells like rot and rain. Mosquitoes swarm. Somewhere a bird calls high sharp urgent. The air is thick enough to chew. George glasses the trees through his scope as dawn light filters through the canopy. The Lyman Alaskan's 2.5 times magnification isn't much not like the 10 times scopes snipers use today, but it's enough to see movement in the branches that the naked eye would miss. He scans methodically, left to right, top to bottom, tree by tree. The key is patience, filtering out the noise, ignoring the birds and insects and wind, focusing only on movement that doesn't belong. Banyan trees can grow 90 feet tall. At that height, a man is invisible from the ground without magnification. But with the scope, George can see details the fork where branches meet shadows that might be clothing shapes that might be human. He's been watching for 3 hours when his hands start to tremble, not from fear, from responsibility, because George knows that in the next few minutes he's going to change. The man who looks through this scope and pulls this trigger won't be the same man who competed at Camp Perry, won't be the same farm boy who saved 2 years to buy this rifle. Killing a man, even an enemy, changes you forever. The sun climbs higher, 8 o'clock a.m., 8:30, 9 o'clock, still nothing. George's eyes ache from staring through the scope. His shoulders cramp from holding the rifle. His mind starts to wander, and that's when the branch moves. 9:17 a.m. exactly. 87 feet up in a banyan tree, 240 yards away. A branch shifts. No wind, just the subtle movement of weight settling. George freezes, focuses the scope. There, in the fork, where 3 branches meet, a dark shape. Slowly it resolves into a human form. A man in dark clothing, positioned to watch the American supply trail. The Japanese sniper. George's heart hammers. This is it. This is the moment. Through the scope, George can see the sniper's profile. Young, maybe George's age, he's holding an Arisaka rifle with a scope of his own. For one crystalline second, George thinks we're the same. 2 marksmen, 2 champions. Different flags, same war. Then he remembers the 14 Americans. Corporal Davis, Private Wilson. George controls his breathing. Inhale, exhale halfway, hold. The Winchester's trigger is glass smooth, 3.5 pounds of pressure perfectly adjusted at Camp Perry before the war. George's training takes over, 2 clicks right for wind. Crosshairs on center mass just below the collarbone. The Japanese sniper shifts, raising his rifle toward the trail. George squeezes the trigger. The Winchester kicks into George's shoulder. The sound cracks through the jungle like thunder. 240 yards away, the Japanese sniper jerks. His rifle tumbles from his hands. For one impossible moment, he seems to hang in the air. Then he falls, 90 feet through the banyan branches, crashing through leaves and vines, and hits the jungle floor with an impact George can hear from his position. John George has just killed a man. He works the bolt mechanically. The empty brass ejects spinning through the air. He chambers another round, keeps the scope on the tree. His hands are steady. That surprises him. His stomach is churning. That doesn't, but there's no time for reflection, because Japanese snipers don't work alone. They work in pairs. And somewhere in that jungle, a second sniper has just heard the shot that killed his partner. He knows approximately where George is. He's turning his rifle toward that sound right now. The duel has only just begun. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to ask you something. If you're watching this and you served during World War II, or if your father or grandfather served in the Pacific Theater, this story matters. These men, the ones who fought with whatever weapon they had, who improvised and adapted and overcame, they deserve to be remembered. So please hit that subscribe button right now. We're sharing forgotten stories like this every single week. Stories about ordinary Americans who did extraordinary things. And drop a comment telling us, did you or someone you love serve on Guadalcanal in the Pacific? What stories did they share? Your memories matter. And this community, all of us here, keeping these stories alive, that matters too. Now back to George and the second sniper. Japanese snipers work in pairs, 1 shooter, 1 spotter. George has just killed the shooter. That means the spotter is close, probably in an adjacent tree, watching through binoculars, ready to call adjustments or take over if his partner is compromised. George scans the surrounding banyans methodically. The scope's 2.5 times magnification forces him to search slowly. Each tree could hide multiple men. The canopy creates shadows that make shapes impossible to distinguish without careful observation. Seconds tick by. 9:18 a.m., 9:20, 9:25. Where is he? George's training at Camp Perry didn't cover this. You don't practice finding hidden snipers who are actively hunting you. Every moment George spends searching is a moment the Japanese spotter can use to locate him to line up a shot to there. 9:43 a.m. Different tree 60 yards north of the first. This one is lower, maybe 50 feet up instead of 90. George sees movement. The spotter is retreating, climbing down the trunk. He's heard the shot, knows his position is compromised. He's moving to a safer tree or fleeing entirely. George has maybe 10 seconds before the spotter reaches the ground and disappears into the jungle undergrowth. If that happens, the sniper escapes. Regroups, comes back tomorrow with a better position and a personal vendetta. No time for careful aim, no time for perfect breathing control. George puts the crosshairs on the moving target, leads the movement by 2 feet to account for the sniper's downward climb and fires. The Japanese spotter jerks backward off the tree trunk. His rifle clatters through the branches ahead of him, tumbling end over end. end. Both man and weapon hit the jungle floor within seconds of each other. 2 shots, 2 kills. George works the bolt reloads from a stripper clip. 5 fresh rounds. His hands are perfectly steady now. The muscle memory from 1,000 competition shoots has taken over completely. This is no different than Camp Perry, he tells himself, except it is, because these targets don't get up when the match is over. George allows himself 30 seconds to process what he's just done. He's killed 2 human beings in 26 minutes. Men who woke up this morning, ate breakfast, climbed into position with the same careful professionalism George brings to his own work. They were good at their jobs. George was better. Is that something to feel proud of, guilty about? He doesn't know. Maybe both. Later, he'll think about it later. Right now, 9 more Japanese snipers are out there, and they've just heard 2 shots from an American position. They know someone is hunting them now. 11:21 a.m. George has been scanning trees for 2 hours, watching for the slightest movement. His eyes ache. His shoulders burn from holding the rifle. Then, crack. A Japanese bullet strikes the sandbag 6 inches from George's head. The impact sprays dirt into his face, blinding him momentarily. George rolls left, pressing himself against the bunker wall, heart hammering. The shot came from the southwest, different direction than the first 2 snipers. Of course, the snipers heard George's shots. They've spent the last 2 hours triangulating his position, and now one of them has found him. George waits 3 full minutes pressed flat against the wall before moving. Standard sniper doctrine: shoot and relocate. The Japanese sniper will have moved after taking that shot. But jungle offers limited relocation options. Heavy undergrowth restricts movement. The good shooting positions, the ones with clear sight lines, are few and predictable. George inches back to his firing position and glasses the trees to the southwest. Come on. Where are you? 11:38 a.m. Third tree from the left in a cluster of 5 banyans, 73 feet up. The Japanese sniper has repositioned to a different branch, but remained in the same tree. A mistake. George puts the crosshairs on the dark shape and fires without hesitation. The third sniper falls without making a sound. 3 shots in the last 2 hours. 3 Japanese snipers dead. George has just reduced the enemy sniper force by 27% in a single morning. Word begins to spread through the battalion. Men who mocked his mail-order rifle are now asking Captain Morris if they can watch George work. Morris refuses. Spectators draw attention. Attention draws fire. But the mockery has stopped. By noon, George has killed 5 Japanese snipers. 5 shots, 5 kills. The Winchester is performing flawlessly. But something has changed in the jungle. The snipers have adapted. They've stopped moving during daylight. George spends the afternoon glassing trees and seeing nothing. It's like they've vanished. At 4:00 p.m., Captain Morris sends a runner to extract him. George reports to battalion headquarters. Colonel Wilson is waiting, and the mockery is gone from his voice. Continue tomorrow, Lieutenant. Same position, 0530 hours. That night, George cleans his Winchester and considers the mathematics. 11 snipers total, 5 dead, 6 remaining. And those 6 have spent all afternoon studying George's tactics, learning his patterns, planning their counter moves. Tomorrow won't be like today. Tomorrow, the hunters become the hunted. January 23rd, 1943, dawn. George returns to his position before sunrise, but the jungle has other plans. Heavy tropical rain sweeps in, turning the grove into a gray wall of water. Visibility drops to less than 100 yards. George sits in the bunker and waits. Patience is the primary skill of sniper work. Not shooting any trained marksman can shoot. The real skill is the ability to remain still, to let time pass, to wait for the right moment rather than force a bad shot. George has been waiting for 3 hours when the rain finally stops. 8:15 a.m. By 8:45, enough visibility has returned for work. George realizes something. The Japanese snipers are smart. They've been using the rain to reposition. The sound of heavy rain masks, movement, climbing, adjusting position, even conversation between spotter teams. When George finally spots the first sniper of the day at 9:12 a.m., the setup confirms his theory. The sniper has chosen a tree 290 yards out. That's 50 yards farther than yesterday's kills. The Japanese are learning George's effective range and adapting. Also smart, but 290 yards is well within the Winchester's capability. George compensates for distance and fires. The 6th sniper falls, and then the jungle explodes. 9:57 a.m., Japanese mortars begin hitting the area around George's bunker. They've triangulated his position, probably from muzzle flash or sound. The first rounds land 40 yards short, ranging shots. Boom, boom, boom. The second salvo lands 20 yards short, closer. George's mind races through the math. Third salvo will bracket the bunker. 4th salvo will hit it directly. He has maybe 45 seconds. George grabs his Winchester and runs. He sprints north along the tree-lined boots, slipping in mud vines, catching his legs. Behind him, the 3rd salvo hits exactly where he calculated. The bunker George occupied 30 seconds ago disappears in a fountain of dirt, sandbags, and shrapnel. George dives into a shell crater, pressing himself into the earth as debris rains down around him. His ears ring, his heart hammers. Adrenaline floods his system. That was close. Too close. George allows himself 10 seconds to process he almost died. If he'd hesitated even 5 seconds longer, he'd be scattered across that grove in pieces. Then he forces himself to think tactically. The Japanese know his approximate location now. They'll send infantry to confirm the kill or flush him out. He needs a new position immediately. George relocates to a fallen tree 120 yards north of the destroyed bunker. The tree provides both cover and a clear view of the groves. He settles in and resumes his watch. The dynamic has changed completely now. This is no longer target shooting. This is a duel. The Japanese snipers aren't just defending themselves anymore. They're actively hunting George back. 2:23 p.m., George kills his seventh sniper. This one had climbed high 94 feet up a banyan tree. Excellent concealment, but the height created a silhouette against the sky when the sun angle changed. One shot, one kill, 5:41 p.m., the eighth kill, routine at this point. Japanese sniper at medium range, good hide, but George's patience wins. He waits 40 minutes for the sniper to make a tiny adjustment, just a 6-inch shift, and fires the moment the movement stops. 8 confirmed kills over 2 days. 12 rounds fired, 4 misses. 5 o'clock p.m., Captain Morris sends a runner to extract George. 9 hours in position. Morris wants numbers. George provides them 8 kills, 4 misses, 1 near miss by enemy mortar. Morris asks about ammunition status. George is down to 2 rounds. Morris asks about the rifle. George says it's functional but needs cleaning. Mud in the action, water in the barrel. Morris tells George to clean his rifle and rest. No operations tomorrow. The battalion is moving east. The Point Cruz groves are no longer a priority. The Japanese are evacuating Guadalcanal. Intelligence suggests they'll complete the withdrawal within 2 weeks. George returns to his tent. He field strips the Winchester and spends 2 hours cleaning every component, cosmoline and gun oil. Patches run through the barrel until they come out clean. He checks the scope mounts, adjusts the eye relief loads, 5 fresh rounds. At 2 p.m. the next day, word comes down from division headquarters. The battalion commander wants to see George. George walks to headquarters, wondering if Morris filed a negative report. Unauthorized engagement, excessive ammunition expenditure, operating alone without support. Instead, he finds Morris and 2 other officers waiting. One of them is Colonel Samuel Ferry, the regimental commander. That night, George cleans his Winchester and considers the implications. 11 Japanese snipers total, 8 now dead, 3 remaining. Those 3 are the best, the ones who've survived the longest, the ones who've learned from watching 8 of their comrades die. And they know exactly what George looks like, exactly what rifle he carries, exactly what tactics he uses. George loads 5 fresh rounds and tries to sleep. At 3 o'clock a.m., he gives up and sits in his tent with the rifle across his lap. The rain starts again at 4:15. By 5:30, it's heavy enough that dawn operations will be delayed. George uses the time wisely. He's not going back to the fallen tree. That position is compromised. The Japanese will be watching it. He needs somewhere unexpected. George chooses a new position, a cluster of rocks 70 yards south of his previous location. Marines used it as a machine gun nest back in December. The rocks offer good cover and critically an elevated angle that lets George see down into the tree canopies instead of up at them. Different perspective, different advantage. At 7:43 a.m., after the rain slows, George glasses his first tree of the day. What he finds there will test every bit of skill and tactical knowledge he's accumulated over 4 years of competition shooting and 2 days of actual combat, because the Japanese haven't just learned George's tactics, they've learned to use them against him. January 24th, 1943, 8:17 a.m. George has been glassing trees from his elevated rock position for 34 minutes when he finds something interesting. A Japanese sniper in a palm tree 190 yards out, only 40 feet up, unusually low. Most snipers climb high for better sight lines, but this one has chosen concealment over elevation. The palm fronds create a natural hide that would be invisible from ground level. However, George isn't at ground level. His elevated position on the rocks gives him an angle down into the fronds. He can clearly see the dark shape of the sniper's shoulders and head. George adjusts his scope, 2 clicks right for wind, controls his breathing, begins to squeeze the trigger, then stops. Something's wrong. The position is too obvious, too easy. George has been hunting snipers for 3 days. He's killed 8 men. The remaining 3 aren't amateurs. They wouldn't make elementary mistakes. They wouldn't position themselves where an elevated shooter could spot them this easily, unless it's intentional, unless it's bait. George lowers his rifle and scans the surrounding trees methodically. If the sniper in the palm is bait, the real shooter will be positioned to cover him, watching for anyone who takes the shot, waiting for muzzle flash, ready to return fire. It takes 11 minutes. At 8:28 a.m., George finds the real threat. Banyan tree 80 yards northwest of the palm, 91 feet up. The Japanese sniper is positioned in a perfect hide, branches and vines concealing him from three sides, and he's watching George's previous position at the fallen tree. He's waiting for George to appear there, or to take a shot at the bait in the palm tree. George now has two problems. First, the real sniper is watching the wrong location. If George fires at him, the sound will reveal George's actual position. The sniper will relocate before George can work the bolt and chamber another round. Second, if George does nothing, the sniper will eventually realize George isn't at the fallen tree and begin searching for him. Once that happens, George's elevated position on the rocks becomes obvious. It's one of the few good shooting spots in this area. George needs to use the bait against them. Here's what George decides. He'll shoot the decoy sniper in the palm tree. The real sniper will react to the sound, turn toward its shift position to engage. That movement will create a target. If George is fast enough, if he can work the bolt and swing the rifle to the new target in under 3 seconds, he can take both. If he's not fast enough, the real sniper will locate him, and George will be the one with a bullet incoming. High risk, high reward. George makes his decision. 8:32 a.m. George aims at the decoy in the palm tree, adjusts for wind, fires. The decoy jerks and falls from the palm, crashing through fronds. George immediately works the bolt smooth, mechanical, no thought required, ejects the brass chambers a new round, and swings the Winchester toward the banyan tree 91 feet up. The real sniper is turning. George can see the movement through the scope. The Japanese soldier is repositioning to face George's location, bringing his own rifle to bear. It's a race. Who can acquire the target and fire first? George puts the crosshairs on the shifting dark shape and fires before the sniper fully turns. The real sniper falls. His rifle tumbles after him, spinning through the air. 2 shots, 2 kills, 4 seconds between them, but George has revealed his position to anyone else watching. He grabs his rifle and ammunition and runs, doesn't look back, sprints east along the rock line and drops into a drainage ditch 40 yards away, presses himself into the mud, waits. 8:34 a.m. Japanese machine gun fire rakes the rocks where George was positioned 6 seconds earlier. Bullets kick up dust and stone fragments. The fire lasts 17 seconds, an eternity. When it stops, George counts to 60 before moving. Lying in that ditch mud, soaking through his uniform, George has a moment of clarity. This isn't about marksmanship anymore. It's about tactical chess. Every move creates a counter move. Every position reveals information to the enemy. Every shot is a gamble. The Japanese aren't just trying to kill Americans now. They're specifically trying to kill him. And George realizes he's earned their respect. They're treating him like a peer, like a worthy opponent. In another time, another place, he and these Japanese snipers might have competed at Camp Perry together, compared notes on wind reading and trigger control, shared a beer after the match. Instead, they're trying to kill each other. War is strange that way. George relocates again, this time to a shell crater partially filled with rainwater 100 yards east. He settles into the crater with water up to his chest, rests the Winchester on the crater rim, and resumes glassing trees. The water is cold. Hypothermia is a risk if he stays here too long, but the concealment is perfect. 10 confirmed kills in 3 days, 1 remaining. The 11th sniper is the best of them all, the smartest, most experienced, most patient. He's watched 10 of his comrades die over 3 days. He knows George's tactics. He knows George's rifle. He knows George's approximate location. And somewhere in that jungle, he's watching, waiting, planning. George scans methodically, searching for any sign, but hours pass, nothing. The 11th sniper has gone completely silent. No shots, no movement. It's like he's vanished. Or George realizes with a chill, maybe he's not in the trees at all. 9:47 a.m. George has been in the water-filled crater for nearly an hour. The cold has seeped into his bones. His legs are numb, but the Winchester remains steady on the crater rim scope. Trained on the trees, he's searching for the 11th sniper, the last one, the best one. But George is looking in the wrong place. He's been scanning the canopy 80 feet up, 90 feet up, because that's where snipers belong. That's where the other 10 were. That's where logic says the 11th should be, except the 11th sniper isn't logical. He's adaptive, and he's not in the trees. George catches the movement at the edge of his peripheral vision, not up, down. 60 yards south, low to the ground, a shape moving through the undergrowth, ferns, vines, fallen branches. George's stomach drops. The Japanese sniper is on the ground, crawling, using the jungle floor vegetation for cover, moving parallel to the tree line toward George's last known position at the rocks. Of course, it makes perfect sense. The sniper watched George kill 10 men from elevated positions, watched the machine gun fire at the rocks, knows George has been relocating to stay unpredictable. But one thing George can't change is basic geography. There are only so many good shooting positions in this area. The bunker is destroyed. The fallen tree is compromised. The rocks were just attacked. That leaves the drainage ditch and this water-filled crater. The Japanese sniper is doing exactly what George would do in his position, working methodically toward each likely location, eliminating them one by one until he finds his target. George remains motionless in the water. The Winchester is already shouldered, but the angle is wrong. The crater rim blocks his view of the approaching sniper. To get a clear shot, George would have to rise up. Rising up would expose him silhouette against the crater rim, visible from dozens of positions. If the sniper on the ground has a partner and Japanese snipers always work in pairs, George would be dead before he could squeeze the trigger. George forces himself to wait, to watch, to think. The sniper stops moving at 9:52 a.m. He's reached a position 40 yards from the rock, studying the area, searching for movement. George can see him clearly now through the scope. Young, maybe 25. Dark uniform, excellent camouflage discipline. He's carrying an Arisaka Type 98 with a scope professional equipment. For 7 minutes, neither man moves. This is what sniper work really is. Not the dramatic shots, not the high body counts. Just this two men invisible to each other, waiting to see who makes the first mistake. 9:58 a.m. The Japanese sniper begins moving again, crawling forward, 35 yards from the rocks, 30 yards, 25. He's approaching from the south side, the same direction George used when he evacuated under machine gun fire. Smart. The sniper watched that engagement. He knows George moved east from the rocks. Now he's working his way along the most likely escape route, hunting George the same way George hunted him. George can see individual details now, the sniper's hands gripping his rifle mud on his uniform, the careful way he tests each movement before committing his weight. This man is good, very good. 20 yards from the rocks, 15, 10. At 10:03 a.m., the Japanese sniper reaches the rocks and moves into the machine gun nest. He takes up a position facing east, toward the drainage ditch, toward the area where George should have relocated. His back is exposed. Center mass, 38 yards, an easy shot even without magnification. George has a clear view, perfect angle, the Winchester's already aimed. All he has to do is squeeze the trigger, but something stops him. This sniper has survived 10 days of American operations in the Point Cruz Groves. He's outlived 10 other snipers' men who were killed because they made mistakes. This man doesn't make mistakes. The position in the rocks is too exposed, too vulnerable. No experienced sniper would remain there for more than a few seconds unless it's bait. George keeps his scope on the sniper in the rocks, but expands his awareness to the surrounding area. If this is bait, the real threat will be positioned to cover it, somewhere with line of sight to anyone who takes the shot, where George scans methodically, fighting the urge to rush. His eyes ache, his body screams to move, to shoot, to end this, but he waits. 10:06 a.m. There, 70 yards northwest of the rocks behind a fallen tree trunk, a second Japanese soldier, not moving, not repositioning, just watching, waiting. His rifle is aimed toward the drainage ditch where George should be hiding. Two men, not one. The 11th sniper brought support. Or perhaps these are the final two snipers, numbers 10 and 11, working together. Either way, George's situation has just become exponentially more dangerous. He can't shoot both men before they react. The Winchester's bolt action requires him to work the action between shots that gives them time to locate him and return fire. If he shoots the decoy in the rocks, the real sniper behind the log will see the muzzle flash and kill George. If he shoots the real sniper first, the decoy will hear the shot turn and locate George within seconds. George has three options: one, shoot, and hope he can work the bolt fast enough to take both targets. Low probability of success. Two, do nothing and hope they move past his position without finding him. Also low probability, they're clearly searching systematically. Three, wait for a better opportunity, trust his patience and tactical knowledge to create an advantage. George chooses option three. Slowly, so slowly, it takes 2 full minutes. George lowers himself deeper into the water. The water is cold. Algae floats on the surface. It tastes like copper and rot. George submerges until only his eyes and the top of his head remain above the surface. He keeps the Winchester pointed skyward to keep water out of the barrel. His finger stays off the trigger, too easy to accidentally discharge if his numb hands slip. Then he waits. The water laps against his face. A leech attaches to his neck. George ignores it. Movement means death right now. 10:13 a.m. The Japanese soldier in the rocks stands up. He's spent 10 minutes watching the drainage ditch and seen nothing. He believes George has moved farther east. He turns and signals to his partner behind the fallen tree. Both men begin moving east, parallel to each other, 70 yards apart. They're executing a sweep, planning to flush George out or find his position through systematic search. George remains in the water, motionless. The two Japanese soldiers move past his crater now, between George and the tree line. Their backs are exposed. This is it. This is the moment George has been waiting for. Slowly fighting every instinct that screams to move fast, George rises from the water. Water streams off George's uniform, off the Winchester's barrel, off his face. The cold has made his movements stiff, but his hands are steady. Training overrides overrides discomfort. Muscle memory overrides fear. He brings the Winchester to his shoulder, smooth, practiced, the same motion he's made 10,000 times at Camp Perry on his father's farm in competition. The closer soldier, the one who was in the rocks, is 42 yards away. Walking slowly, the rifle held ready, scanning the undergrowth. George puts the crosshairs between his shoulder blades. Inhale, exhale halfway, hold, squeeze, SFX crack. The soldier drops instantly. No cry, no struggle, just down. George works the bolt before the body hits the ground. The movement is automatic. Eject brass chamber, a new round, acquire the next target. The second soldier behind the fallen tree is turning. He's heard the shot. 70 yards out. He's raising his rifle toward the sound. It's another race. Who can acquire and fire first? George swings the Winchester, leads the turning movement, and fires. The second soldier jerks and falls backward behind the log. For 3 seconds, the jungle is completely silent. No birds, no insects. Even the wind seems to hold its breath. Then the sounds return. A bird calls. Leaves rustle. Life continues. George stands in the water-filled crater, rifle still shouldered, scanning for additional threats. His hands are shaking now, not from cold, from adrenaline crash. 11 shots fired over 4 days. 11 Japanese snipers dead. George has cleared the Point Cruz groves, done what an entire battalion couldn't do, eliminated the threat that killed 14 Americans in 72 hours. He should feel victorious, proud. Instead, he feels tired. George climbs out of the crater slowly. His legs barely support him, partly from cold, partly from exhaustion, partly from the emotional weight of what he's just done. He walks to the 2 bodies, doesn't look closely, doesn't search them, just confirms they're dead, then moves on. This is the part nobody talks about in the glory stories, the moment after, when the adrenaline fades and you're left with the reality of what you've done. George has killed 11 men in 4 days. 11 human beings who woke up this morning who had families who believed they were fighting for their country, just like George believes he's fighting for his. Were they the enemy? Yes. Would they have killed Americans if George hadn't stopped them? Absolutely. Does that make it easier? Not really. George is retrieving his spent cartridges. Military habit. Always police your brass when he hears something that makes him freeze. Voices. Japanese voices. Coming from the tree line. Multiple men moving toward the fallen soldiers. George has killed the snipers, but the snipers weren't working alone. There's an infantry patrol or a recovery team or reinforcements, and they're coming directly toward him. George drops back into the crater. The water is cold. He submerges until only his eyes remain above the surface. Winchester held vertically to keep the barrel clear. The voices grow louder. At least 6 men, maybe more. They're moving toward the 2 dead soldiers George just shot 42 yards from his crater, close enough that George can hear them clearly, even without understanding the words. 10:28 a.m. The Japanese soldiers reach the first body. Urgent conversation. Tone shifts. They've found their dead. Then the voices move to the second body. More talk, and then the voices start moving again. Not back toward the tree line, toward George's crater. They found his tracks, boot prints in the mud leading from the rocks to the crater. George had been careful about noise, about movement, about concealment, but he hadn't been careful about tracks. George has 5 rounds in the Winchester, 6 Japanese soldiers minimum. Poor odds for a bolt-action rifle. The voices grow closer. 30 yards, 25, 20. George considers his options. Stay hidden and hope they pass by. They won't. They're following his tracks directly to the crater. Fight. 6-1 odds with a bolt-action rifle against semi-automatics. Suicide. Run. Best option, but he'll be exposed during the sprint. George chooses to run, but not yet. He waits for the exact right moment when the soldiers are close enough that they'll hesitate before firing, afraid of hitting each other. 10:31 a.m. A Japanese soldier appears at the crater rim. Looking down, their eyes meet. George fires from the water. The soldier falls backward. George works the bolt while still submerged chambers. Another round rises up. 2 more soldiers at the crater rim. George fires, works the bolt, fires again. Both drop. 3 rounds left. More soldiers approaching. George can hear them shouting, running toward the crater. He climbs out on the north side away from the approaching voices and runs. George sprints 20 yards and drops behind a fallen tree. Japanese rifle fire cracks through the jungle. Bullets strike the ground around the crater, around the fallen tree. The soldiers are firing at movement at sound, not at confirmed targets. Wildfire, panic fire. George glasses the area through his scope. Sees movement. 2 soldiers advancing toward the crater 50 yards out. He aims at the lead soldier, fires. The soldier drops. The second soldier dives for cover. 2 rounds left. But George hears more voices behind him. The Japanese are flanking. One group approaching from the south, another from the east. He's about to be surrounded. George makes his decision instantly. He can't win a firefight with 2 rounds against multiple soldiers with semi-automatic rifles. He needs to break contact, get back to American lines. He grabs his rifle and runs north. Full sprint through the jungle undergrowth. Vines catch his boots. Branches whip his face. His lungs burn. Japanese rifle fire follows him. Bullets snap past, strike trees, kick up dirt. George runs for 90 seconds, the longest 90 seconds of his life, before diving into another shell crater. This one is dry. He presses himself against the crater wall and listens. The Japanese voices are distant now. They haven't pursued. They're regrouping around their dead. George checks his rifle. Mud on the stock. water still dripping from the barrel. He has 2 rounds left and no stripper clips. Those are back in his pack near the water-filled crater. 10:47 a.m., George begins moving again. Not running, walking, staying low, using terrain for cover, moving northeast toward the American perimeter. The jungle is quiet, no voices, no movement, just George and the sound of his own breathing. At 11:13 a.m., George reaches the American perimeter. A Marine sentry challenges him. Second Lieutenant George, 132nd Infantry, returning from patrol. The sentry's eyes widen. George realizes what he must look like: soaked uniform, covered in mud, rifle dripping water, face scratched and bleeding from branches. Jesus, sir, you okay? I'm fine. Which way? To battalion headquarters. The Marine points. George walks through the perimeter. Battalion headquarters is a large tent with maps pinned to wooden boards and radio equipment crackling with traffic. Captain Morris looks up when George enters and does a double take. George, we heard heavy rifle fire from your sector. Thought you might be. He stops, sees George's condition. What happened out there? George sets his Winchester carefully against the tent pole and delivers his report. 11 Japanese snipers eliminated over 4 days, sir. 11 rounds fired against sniper targets. 11 confirmed kills. Then engaged enemy infantry. 3 more casualties. 5 total rounds in that engagement. After that, I broke contact and returned to friendly lines. Morris stares. You engaged infantry, how many? At least 6, sir. Maybe more. With a bolt-action rifle. I didn't have much choice, sir. They found my position. Morris shakes his head slowly. Lieutenant, do you understand what you've just done? Those 11 snipers have been terrorizing this battalion for weeks, killed 14 of our men, and you, in 4 days. He trails off, looking at the Winchester. Nobody's laughing about the mail-order rifle now. Morris asks about ammunition status. George reports 2 rounds remaining. Morris asks about the rifle's condition. George, functional but needs cleaning. Mud in the action, water in the barrel. Morris, clean your rifle and rest, Lieutenant. No operations tomorrow. Battalion is moving east anyway. The Point Cruz Groves are no longer a priority. George nods. The Japanese are evacuating Guadalcanal. Intelligence suggests they'll complete the withdrawal within 2 weeks. George's war in the Groves is over. George returns to his tent, spends 2 hours field stripping the Winchester, cleaning every component with gun oil and cosmoline, runs patches through the barrel until they come out clean, checks the scope mounts, adjusts the eye relief, loads 5 fresh rounds. At 2:00 p.m. word comes down, Colonel Ferry wants to see George. Division headquarters. George walks to HQ, wondering if Morris filed a negative report: unauthorized engagement, excessive ammunition expenditure, operating alone without support. Instead, he finds Morris and 2 other officers waiting. One of them is Colonel Samuel Ferry, regimental commander. Ferry gets straight to the point. Lieutenant George, can you train other men to do what you just did? George considers this carefully. I can teach marksmanship, sir, and I can teach tactics, but it would require time, and rifles with optics, and men who can already shoot. Ferry nods. Division has 14 Springfield rifles with unertl scopes, Marine surplus, left behind when they rotated out, and I have 40 men in this regiment who qualified as expert marksmen before deployment. He looks George in the eye. I want you to create a sniper section, train these men, develop tactics, clear any remaining Japanese snipers from our operational areas. Can you do it? George has one condition: I keep my Winchester, sir. Ferry actually smiles. Lieutenant, after what you just did, you can keep whatever rifle you want. The 14 Springfields go to your trainees. George accepts. That night, January 24th, 1943, George sits alone in his tent with the Winchester across his lap. The rifle is clean now. Perfect. Ready for tomorrow's training, but George's hands are shaking. Not from cold this time, not from adrenaline, from something else, something he doesn't have a name for yet. In 4 days, John George has killed 14 men, 11 snipers, 3 infantry, 14 human beings who woke up 4 days ago alive, who had names, families, homes somewhere across the Pacific. George knows intellectually that he did the right thing. Those snipers killed 14 Americans first. They would have killed more. George saved lives by taking lives. But knowing that doesn't make the weight any lighter. He thinks about the first sniper, the one at 9:17 a.m. on January 22nd, how George could see his profile through the scope, how the man shifted his weight just before the shot, how he fell 90 feet through the banyan tree. George thinks about the final 2, the ones working together, how they were good, how they almost got him, how if he'd been even 10 seconds slower rising from that crater, they would have walked past and he would have survived, but he didn't wait. He shot them in the back. Is that honorable? Is that brave? Or is it just what war requires? George doesn't feel like a hero. He feels tired and old. And haunted by 11 faces he'll never forget, faces he saw through a scope for just a few seconds before pulling the trigger. The other officers will call him a hero. Colonel Ferry already has. The men in the battalion are already spreading stories about the lieutenant with the mail order rifle who killed 11 snipers in 4 days. But George knows the truth. Heroes are what we call people who survive doing terrible things for good reasons, and the terrible things still have to be lived with long after the good reasons have faded. Tomorrow, George will teach 40 men how to do what he just did, how to look through a scope and see a human being and pull the trigger anyway, how to live with it afterward. That second part, the living with it, that's not something you can teach. That's something each man has to figure out on his own. Before I tell you what happened next with George's training program, I need to ask you something. If you're watching this and you served during World War II, or if your father or grandfather served in the Pacific Theater, this story matters. These men, the ones who fought with whatever weapon they had, who improvised and adapted and overcame, they deserve to be remembered. So please hit that subscribe button right now. We're sharing forgotten stories like this every single week. Stories about regular folks who stepped up when their country needed them. And drop a comment telling us, did you or someone you love serve on Guadalcanal in the Pacific? What stories did they share? Your memories matter. And this community, all of us here keeping these stories alive, that matters too. Now, let me tell you about the sniper section George created, January 27th, 1943. 40 men assemble at a makeshift rifle range 2 miles east of Henderson Field. They're all expert marksmen on paper, qualified with iron sights at ranges up to 500 yards. But none of them have combat experience as snipers. None of them have killed a man from concealment. George stands before them with his Winchester and speaks plainly. Gentlemen, I'm not here to teach you how to shoot. You already know how to shoot. I'm here to teach you how to hunt men. That's different. When you look through your scope, you're going to see details. You'll see his face, maybe see him adjust his equipment or take a drink from his canteen. And for just a second, you're going to think, that's a person. You'll hesitate. That hesitation will get you killed, or it'll get your spotter killed, or it'll get the American patrol that's counting on you to clear their route killed. So here's what I'm going to teach you: how to make the shot anyway, how to do the job you've been assigned, and how to live with it afterward. George starts with fundamentals: breathing control, inhale fully, exhale halfway, hold squeeze, never jerk the trigger, reading wind. Watch vegetation movement, feel it on your face, adjust your point of aim, trigger squeeze, 3.5 pounds of pressure, smooth and steady, like breaking a glass rod. The Springfield rifles weigh 11 pounds with the inertial scopes, heavier than the M1 Garand most of them are used to, heavier than George's Winchester. The weight makes them stable, but tiring to hold for extended periods. George teaches field improvisation. The jungle rarely offers a perfect prone position. Use rocks, logs, sandbags, your spotter's shoulder if that's all you have. Adapt or die. Day 2, George adds stress. Shoot after sprinting 100 yards, your heart hammering, breathing ragged hands, shaking from exertion. Make the shot anyway. Shoot while under simulated artillery. Blank charges going off nearby. Dirt and noise. Chaos. Ignore it. Focus on the target. Shoot at targets that appear for only 3 seconds, then disappear. No time for perfect setup. See it, shoot it, move on. This isn't Camp Perry. This isn't competition. This is preparing for the moment when everything goes wrong and you still need to make the shot. Day 3, George speaks about what nobody wants to discuss. You're going to see a man through your scope. He'll have a face. You might see him light a cigarette or read a letter from home. He's trying to kill Americans. Maybe he already has. If you don't stop him, he will again. First time is the hardest. You'll hesitate. Your finger will freeze on that trigger. But remember, he's a soldier. You're a soldier. This is war, not murder. You're not killing a person. You're removing a threat to your brothers in arms. Make the shot. Then deal with how you feel about it later. Alone. In your tent, not in the field where hesitation costs lives. By January 30th, 32 of the 40 men can consistently hit man-sized targets at 300 yards under field conditions. George divides them into 16 two-man teams, shooter and spotter. The spotter carries binoculars and an M1 Garand. His jobs locate targets, provide security, while the shooter engages, offer moral support. After each kill, roles can switch. This keeps both men proficient and prevents single point of failure. 16 teams, 32 men, the 132nd Infantry's official sniper section, ready to deploy. And on February 1st, 1943, they get their first mission. February 1st, 1943. 4 sniper teams deploy west of the Matanikayu River. Their mission clear remaining Japanese positions. Intelligence indicates small groups of stragglers infantry who haven't evacuated yet, not organized snipers like the 11 George eliminated, just regular soldiers trying to survive and delay American advancement. Still dangerous, still lethal. George pairs with Corporal William Hayes as his spotter. Hayes is 24 from Montana, grew up hunting elk in the Rockies. He can glass a hillside and spot movement at 800 yards. They set up on high ground overlooking a supply trail the Japanese have been using. 7:20 a.m., a Japanese soldier appears on the trail. alone, carrying supplies, probably heading to a fallback position deeper in the jungle. Hayes confirms the target through binoculars, calls the range 280 yards, wind 5 miles per hour left to right. George adjusts, fires. The soldier drops. Over the next 6 hours, George's team engages 7 more targets on that trail, 7 shots, 6 kills, 1 miss. George's fault, misjudged the wind. The other 3 teams report similar results. Team 2, led by Sergeant Morrison, 5 kills. Team 3, led by Corporal Jackson, 4 kills. Team 4, led by Lieutenant Anderson, 3 kills. Total for February 1st, 23 Japanese soldiers eliminated, 0 American casualties. February 2nd, 19 kills section-wide. February 3rd, 12 kills. February 4th, 15 kills. February 5th, 11 kills. The Japanese evacuation is accelerating. Destroyers arrive at night to pick up troops from Cape Esperance on Guadalcanal's western tip. American forces push west to interdict the evacuation, but the Japanese fight effective rearguard actions. Georgia's sniper section is tasked with eliminating soldiers covering the retreat routes. By February 6th, the section has killed 68 Japanese soldiers in 6 days, 0 friendly casualties during sniper operations. From a military perspective, it's a stunning success. Division headquarters sends official commendation. Colonel Ferry recommends George for a Bronze Star, but George sees the cost that doesn't appear in official reports. Private Chen stops eating, says food tastes like ash. Sergeant Morrison has nightmares, wakes up screaming about faces in trees. Lieutenant Anderson requests transfer back to regular infantry. I can't do this anymore, he tells George quietly, looking at them through the scope. I can't. George approves the transfer. No questions asked, no judgment. Some men can compartmentalize. They make the shot, police their brass move to the next target. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Others can't. They see the man fall and something breaks inside them. George doesn't know which type he is yet. Maybe both, maybe neither. He just knows that every night alone in his tent, he counts the faces, keeps a tally in his mind. 14 by his own hand on Guadalcanal, 68 more by men he trained. 82 lives ended because George taught other men how to pull the trigger. Is he proud of that? Ashamed? He honestly doesn't know. February 7th, 1943, near the Tanamboa River. George and Hayes are operating in dense jungle hunting a reported Japanese machine gun position. They've been moving quietly for 2 hours when a rifle shot cracks from somewhere to their left. SFX rifle shot impact. The bullet strikes George's left shoulder. Not a sniper, just a regular rifleman who got lucky. The impact spins George around, knocks him down. His vision goes white with pain. Hayes drags George behind cover, screaming for a corpsman. Through and through. The bullet passed through muscle without hitting bone or major blood vessels. Serious but not fatal. The corpsman applies pressure, stops the bleeding, administers morphine. George is evacuated to the field hospital near Henderson Field. Field Hospital, Henderson Field. The doctors clean George's wound and suture it closed. Tell him he'll recover but needs rest. 3 weeks minimum. No combat operations. George spends his days in a cot reading letters from home, watching other wounded men come and go. The Winchester leans in the corner of the tent, untouched. While George recovers, the war moves. On February 9th, American forces reach Cape Esperance. It's empty. The Japanese have completed their evacuation of Guadalcanal. The campaign is over. 6 months of fighting, 700 Americans killed, 29,000 Japanese killed, and now silence. George's sniper section operated for exactly 12 days, February 1st through February 12th. Final tally, 74 confirmed kills section-wide, 0 friendly casualties during sniper operations. Division headquarters officially recognizes the section. Colonel Ferry's recommendation for George's Bronze Star is approved, but George doesn't feel victorious. He feels empty. George writes a letter to his parents, doesn't mention the snipers, doesn't mention the kills. Just says, "Dear mother and father, I was wounded, but I'm fine now. The doctors say I'll make a full recovery. The rifle performed flawlessly. You were right that the army would give me a weapon, but I'm glad I brought my own. I hope to be home soon. I miss the farm. Your son John," he doesn't tell them that he's killed 14 men, that he trained others who killed 74 more, that he's not the same John who left Illinois 2 years ago. Some things you can't put in a letter home. Late February, while George is still recovering, new orders arrive from Pacific Command. Experienced combat officers needed for a classified mission. Burma, long-range jungle operations. George volunteers without hesitation because staying on Guadalcanal means thinking, remembering, counting faces. Burma means moving forward, new mission, new challenges, maybe new purpose. By March 1943, George is discharged from the field hospital. He spends the next year stateside recovery training duties at Fort Benning, teaching the lessons learned from Guadalcanal to new officer candidates. The Winchester sits in his footlocker, occasionally cleaned, rarely discussed. In January 1944, George volunteers for Burma. The mission brief is classified, but the basics are clear: long-range penetration operations behind Japanese lines, jungle warfare, no supply lines. High casualties expected. George's expertise makes him a natural fit. By February 1944, he's on a transport ship to India. April 1944. George's transport reaches India. He steps off the ship into heat that makes the South Pacific feel temperate. India in spring. 110 degrees humidity, you can taste monsoon season approaching. 200 officers assemble for briefing, George among them. The unit has a number 5307 composite unit provisional, but the men already call themselves something else. They call themselves Merrill's Marauders. The briefing is classified, but the basics are clear. Objective capture Myatkina airfield in northern Burma. The airfield controls Allied supply routes into China. Japanese forces hold it with approximately 4,000 troops. Approach overland through terrain the Japanese consider impassable. Mountains, rivers, dense jungle, no roads, limited trails, method light and fast. Each man carries everything on his back, no motorized transport, no artillery support, just rifles, mortars, and the ability to move through impossible terrain, distance over 700 miles through some of the most hostile jungle on Earth. Expected casualties high. George volunteers immediately. That night, George examines his Winchester Model 70 in the barracks. The rifle performed flawlessly on Guadalcanal, but that was short-range operations with regular resupply. Burma will be different patrols lasting weeks, hundreds of miles from support. Every ounce of weight matters when you're carrying 60 pounds of equipment through mountainous jungle. George makes modifications, removes the Lyman Alaskan scope. The glass is pristine, but at 12 ounces, it's heavy for what it delivers. Replaces it with a lighter Weaver 330C scope. Same 2.5 times magnification, but only 4 ounces. 8 ounces saved. The wooden stock has served well, but George has access to experimental synthetic materials through the Marauders' supply chain. He swaps it out, saves another 6 ounces. Total weight reduction, 9 pounds, 12 ounces, down to 8 pounds, 14 ounces. Not much, but over 700 miles, every ounce is a mile. The Marauders train in central India for several weeks. Long-range penetration tactics, jungle survival, operations without supply lines. The unit is modeled after British Brigadier Ord Wingate's Chindit's small mobile forces operating deep behind enemy lines for extended periods. George is assigned to 2nd Battalion as a rifle platoon leader. His role isn't officially listed as sniper. The Army still doesn't have formal sniper positions in its table of organization, but Battalion Command knows what George did on Guadalcanal. Colonel Ferry's recommendation followed him across the Pacific. They know what he can do with that rifle. During training, George realizes something fundamental. Burma isn't Guadalcanal. Guadalcanal fixed positions, tree snipers, clear sight lines across groves. Enemies who stayed in one place long enough to shoot. Burma constant movement, close-range ambushes, dense vegetation where you can't see 30 feet, combat at 50 yards or less often, much less. The Winchester, perfect for Guadalcanal's long-range precision work, might be the wrong tool for Burma's knife-fighting jungle warfare. But George has carried this rifle halfway around the world. It's killed 14 enemies, saved American lives. He's not leaving it behind now. What George doesn't know yet, what he won't fully understand until 3 months and 700 miles later, is that Burma won't just test his rifle. It'll test everything he believes about the future of warfare and force him to accept a truth that will haunt him for the rest of his life. February 24th, 1944. The 5,307th Composite Unit enters Burma with 5,307 men. The first week, they cover 83 miles through mountainous jungle. Men collapse from exhaustion. Malaria cases increase daily. Pack mules struggle with terrain. Several break legs on steep descents and have to be shot. George's battalion is 2nd Battalion. 300 men reduced to 287 by the end of week 1. This isn't warfare like Guadalcanal. This is survival with occasional combat. The jungle is alive with threats: malaria, dysentery, typhus, leeches the size of your thumb snakes that kill in minutes, insects that burrow into skin. The Japanese aren't the primary enemy. The jungle is. By March, the battalion has covered 217 miles and engaged Japanese forces 12 times. Not pitched battles. Ambushes. Quick firefights followed by rapid withdrawal. The Marauders aren't meant to hold ground. They're meant to move, to harass, to cut supply lines, to create chaos behind Japanese positions. George uses his Winchester 3 times in those first weeks. March 15th, Japanese officer directing troops at a river crossing. 412 yards across the water, George sets up on high ground. The officer is animated, pointing clearly, coordinating the crossing. One shot, the officer drops, the crossing descends into chaos. The Marauders move on before the Japanese can organize a response. March 28th, Japanese machine gun pinning down a Marauder patrol. 380 yards elevated position. George can't see the gunner clearly, too much vegetation, but he can see the muzzle flash, can calculate the position. Fires at where the gunner must be. The machine gun goes silent. The patrol extracts. April 12th, Japanese sniper has killed 2 Americans and wounded 3 more. The battalion is pinned in a valley. George spends 4 hours searching for the sniper. Finally spots movement at 290 yards, just a tiny shift in the branches. One shot, The sniper falls. The battalion moves out. 3 engagements, 3 shots, 3 kills. But George realizes something troubling. In 3 months and over 700 miles, he's only fired his Winchester 3 times. 3 times. On Guadalcanal, he fired 11 times in 4 days. The math is unavoidable. The Winchester, the rifle that proved its worth on Guadalcanal, is barely relevant in Burma. Why most combat happens at close range, 50 yards or less. Firefights in vegetation so dense you're shooting at sound and muzzle flash, not visible targets. The Marauders need volume of fire, not precision. Semi-automatic M1 Garands, putting 8 rounds downrange fast, not bolt-action rifles requiring manual cycling between shots. When you can't see more than 30 feet, 2.5 times magnification doesn't matter. When ambushes happen at 20 yards precision, marksmanship doesn't matter. What matters is, can you put lead on target before they put lead on you? By late May, the Marauders have covered over 700 miles. They've lost more men to disease than combat. Malaria, dysentery, typhus, infected wounds, exhaustion. The unit that entered Burma with 5,307 men is down to fewer than 3,000 effectives. May 17th, the Marauders capture Myitkyina airfield. The operation is a success, a strategic victory that will shorten the war in the Pacific. But the cost has been devastating. George sits in a captured Japanese bunker on the edge of Myitkyina airfield, cleaning his Winchester for what feels like the 1,000th time. The rifle that proved civilian marksmanship could match military training. The rifle that cleared the Point Cruz groves when a battalion couldn't. The rifle George saved 2 years of National Guard pay to buy. He's fired it 7 times total in 3 months of operations, 7 times. And in those 3 months, George has learned something that hurts more than the malaria coursing through his blood, more than the infected scratches covering his arms, more than the weight loss that's dropped him from 165 pounds to 132. Individual skill, no matter how exceptional, has limits. The future of warfare isn't precision marksmanship, it's industrial scale firepower. Semi-automatic rifles, submachine guns, volume of fire. The Winchester Model 70 is the finest bolt-action sporting rifle ever made, but modern warfare has moved on. George has spent 6 years believing that skill matters, that training matters, that a man with the right rifle and the right knowledge can change the outcome of a battle. Guadalcanal proved that. 11 snipers in 4 days proved that, but Burma proved something different, that sometimes skill is obsolete, that sometimes the best rifle in the world is the wrong rifle for the war you're fighting, that sometimes no matter how good you are, you're just not relevant anymore. June 1944. George is evacuated from Burma with the rest of the Marauders. The unit is disbanded, combat ineffective, too many casualties, too much disease, too much time in hell. George carries his Winchester out of Burma, 7 shots fired, 7 kills, perfect accuracy, and absolutely irrelevant to the war's outcome. July 1944. George returns to the United States after nearly 2 years in the Pacific Theater, promoted to captain, assigned to Fort Benning, Georgia. Training duty, he's to teach infantry officers marksmanship and small unit tactics, teach the lessons learned on Guadalcanal and in Burma. Ironic, really. Teaching lessons that are becoming obsolete even as he teaches them. The rifle sits in a footlocker in George's quarters at Fort Benning. He takes it out occasionally, cleans it, runs patches through the barrel, checks the scope mounts, but he rarely looks at it because every time he does, George sees 2 different wars: Guadalcanal, where individual skill mattered, where one man with one rifle eliminated 11 threats and saved American lives. Burma, where individual skill was irrelevant, where the best marksman in the battalion fired 7 shots in 3 months and it didn't matter at all. Which war is the future? George knows the answer, doesn't like it, but knows it. By 1944, the war has evolved. The Pacific Islands are being retaken with overwhelming firepower, artillery, naval bombardment, air support, industrial-scale violence, Europe-American forces advancing through France with tanks, automatic weapons, coordinated combined arms. The individual rifleman, even an exceptional one, is becoming a smaller and smaller part of a much larger machine. For 6 years, George's identity has been marksman, champion, the man who can make the impossible shot. But what is he when that skill no longer matters, when the Army wants mass production, not craftsmen, when interchangeable parts are more valuable than individual excellence? George doesn't know, so he teaches and waits for the war to end. August 1945. Japan surrenders after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The war George trained for, fought and killed for, survived. It's over. George is eligible for discharge in January 1947. Final rank, Lieutenant Colonel. Decorations, 2 Bronze Stars. Purple Heart, combat infantry badge. He's 29 years old and has no idea what to do with the rest of his life. 1947 civilian life. George decides to document what he learned, not for glory, not for recognition, just for the record, while the details are still fresh, while he can still remember the weight of the Winchester, the feel of the trigger, the way a man falls when shot at 240 yards. He writes for 6 months. The manuscript grows to over 400 pages. Clinical descriptions of weapons, ammunition, ballistics, tactics, what worked, what didn't, why. No embellishment, no heroics. politics, just facts. A friend at the National Rifle Association reads it and says, "John, this needs to be published." George is reluctant. It's too technical. Nobody cares about this level of detail. But the NRA convinces him. 1947, Shots Fired in Anger is published. The title comes from a military phrase: a soldier who has fired shots in anger has seen combat, has engaged the enemy, has crossed the line from training to war. George's book is unlike any other war memoir of its era. Most war memoirs are about heroism, patriotism, the glory of combat. We fought, we won, we came home. George's book is a technical manual that happens to include a war. Chapter 3, detailed comparison of the M1 Garand versus Japanese Arisaka Type 99, weight, rate of fire, accuracy, stopping power, reliability in jungle conditions. Chapter 7, the Winchester model, 70s performance on Guadalcanal, scope choice, ammunition selection, why 2.5 times magnification was optimal for jungle work. Chapter 11, training methodology for counter-sniper operations, how to spot concealed positions, how to calculate range without a rangefinder, how to make the shot when you're not sure you should. George writes with brutal honesty about things other veterans won't discuss. The first time he killed a man. I hesitated. Not from moral uncertainty, but from the weight of understanding that this decision was irreversible. The trigger required 3.5 pounds of pressure. That seemed simultaneously too much and not nearly enough. The cost of command. I trained 40 men to kill. 74 enemy soldiers died because I taught others how to pull the trigger. I am not certain whether this makes me proud or ashamed. Perhaps both, perhaps neither. The obsolescence of skill. Burma taught me that individual excellence, no matter how refined, is merely a footnote in modern industrial warfare. This is progress. This is necessity. This does not make it easier to accept. Shots Fired in Anger becomes a classic among firearms enthusiasts and military historians, not because it's dramatic, not because it's inspiring, because it's true. George describes Japanese weapons with the same clinical precision he describes American weapons. No propaganda, no bias, just this is what they used. This is how it performed. This is why. The book is still in print today, still referenced, still studied. After publication, George doesn't talk about the war, doesn't give interviews about Guadalcanal, doesn't attend Marauder reunions. He's done with that part of his life. He enrolls at Princeton University on the GI Bill, 1947 to 1950, Princeton. Studies politics. Graduates with highest honors, 1950 to 1954, Oxford University. 4 years studying African politics and post-colonial institutions, 1954 to 1958, British East Africa, field research, living in Kenya, Tanzania, studying emerging governments, 1958 to 2009, Washington, D.C., scholar, consultant, executive director, Institute of African American Relations, State Department Foreign Affairs Institute lecturer on African affairs. George's colleagues know he served in the Pacific, but they don't know about Point Cruz, don't know about the 11 snipers, don't know about the Winchester. George never speaks publicly about it. That was another life, he tells a curious graduate student once. I'm a scholar now. The rifle sits in a case in George's home in Washington. He cleans it occasionally, maintains it, but never fires it. Sometimes late at night, alone, George takes the Winchester out and holds it, remembers the banyan trees on Guadalcanal, the weight of the rifle in the pre-dawn darkness, the faces he saw through the scope, the 11th sniper crawling through the undergrowth, the moment George rose from the water, the 2 shots that ended the duel, the realization in Burma that all his skill, all his training, all his excellence, it didn't matter anymore. Does George regret Guadalcanal, the killing? The training others to kill American lives were saved, that matters. But does he celebrate it? Does he tell stories? Does he wear his Bronze Stars to dinner parties? Also no. Because George understands something that takes most men a lifetime to learn. You can do the right thing for the right reasons and still carry the weight of it forever. And that's okay. That's part of being human. Over the decades, George watches America fight 3 more wars. Korea, 1950 to 1953. He's at Princeton while men his age fight in frozen mountains. Vietnam, 1964 to 1975. He's consulting for the State Department while the draft sends boys to jungles that remind him of Burma. Gulf War, 1991. He's 76 years old, watching precision-guided missiles on CNN. George watches military rifles evolve, M1, Garand to M14 to M16 to M4. Watches sniping become a formal military specialty. Dedicated training, dedicated equipment. The things George improvised on Guadalcanal are now standard doctrine. Watches the lessons of World War II being relearned by new generations. And he watches the Winchester Model 70, the rifle everyone mocked, become recognized as one of the the finest bolt-action rifles ever made, too late for the war, but recognized nonetheless. In 2008, at age 93, George makes a decision. The Winchester has sat in his home for 63 years. It's part of history. It should be preserved. He donates it to the National Firearms Museum in Fairfax, Virginia, along with the Lyman Alaskan scope he'd removed for Burma, kept separately all these years, his field notes from Guadalcanal, the stripper clips he used, everything. The museum curator asks if George wants to attend the dedication ceremony. George declines. The rifle tells the story better than I can, he says. 1 year later, January 3rd, 2009, John B. George dies at age 94. Quietly, surrounded by books about African politics, not war memoirs. Most obituaries focus on his scholarly work, his decades at the State Department, his contributions to understanding post-colonial Africa. Only a few mention Guadalcanal. Fewer still mention the Winchester. Corporal William Hayes. George's spotter from Guadalcanal survives the war, returns to Montana. He and George exchange Christmas cards for 40 years. Hayes is one of 3 people who attend George's private funeral in 2009. He's 89 years old, using a walker, but he makes the trip from Montana to Washington anyway. At the funeral, Hayes doesn't speak, just stands by the casket for a long time. Later, someone asks what he's thinking about. That first morning, Hayes says quietly, when John rose up out of that crater dripping water and mud and took those last 2 shots, I was watching from the perimeter, thought for sure they'd get him, but he was faster. Hayes pauses. He was always faster, and he never talked about it. That's the last story anyone tells about John George's war. National Firearms Museum, Fairfax, Virginia, present day. Display case number 47, second floor, American Military Small Arms Section, Winchester Model 70.30-06 caliber. The Lyman Alaskan scope George used on Guadalcanal sits beside it, reunited for the display. Original wooden stock with 11 small notches carved into the wood, 1 for each confirmed sniper kill. The placard reads Winchester Model 70.30-06 caliber, used by Second Lieutenant John B. George, 132nd Infantry Regiment, Guadalcanal, 1943. George eliminated 11 Japanese snipers in 4 days, January 22nd to 25th, 1943. Created and led sniper section responsible for 74 additional enemy casualties with 0 friendly losses. Later served with Merrill's Marauders, Burma, 1944. Author of Shots Fired in Anger, 1947. Donated 2008. Most visitors walk past without stopping. To modernize, it's just an old hunting rifle. No tactical rails, no advanced optics, no military markings. It looks like something your grandfather used to hunt deer in the 1950s. Because that's exactly what it is. A civilian sporting rifle that happened to fight a war. The visitors who walk past don't see the pre-dawn darkness on January 22nd, 1943, George settling into that bunker, hands trembling, knowing he's about to kill a man for the first time. The Japanese sniper at 9:17 a.m. falling 90 feet through the banyan tree. The mortar attack that nearly killed George. The sprint to the drainage ditch, the decoy trap, the bait and switch, the tactical chess match between experts, the final duel, George rising from the water, dripping mud and exhaustion, 2 shots, 2 kills, the 11 faces George never forgot. That Winchester represents something visitors can't see in a museum case. The idea that skill matters, that training matters, that individual excellence can change outcomes. The idea that you don't need permission or official approval to be great. You just need to be ready when the moment comes. The idea that sometimes the weapon everyone mocks is exactly the weapon you need, but that rifle also represents something harder, the cost of war, the weight of killing, the faces you see through a scope that you'll never forget, the realization that skill has limits, that individual excellence, no matter how refined, can become obsolete overnight, that doing the right thing doesn't make it easy to live with. Sometimes, not often, but sometimes a veteran stops at the display, reads the placard carefully, sees the notches on the stock, 11 small marks, 11 lives, recognizes the Lyman Alaskan scope for what it is, a 1940s civilian hunting scope that shouldn't have worked in combat but did, understands what it means that George kept this rifle instead of switching to standard issue equipment. That veteran stands there for a long time. Sometimes their hands shake slightly, sometimes their eyes water. They don't say anything, just stand. And remember, they remember their own wars, their own rifles, their own moments when skill and courage and pure luck were all that stood between life and death. They remember the friends who didn't come home. They remember what it feels like to carry weight that civilians don't understand and can't see. And they understand in a way the casual visitors don't what that Winchester really is, a memorial. not to glory or victory, but to the men who fought with what they had, who improvised, who adapted, who overcame, who did terrible things for good reasons and lived with it afterward. If you're watching this and you served Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, any war, you understand what that rifle represents in a way others don't. You understand that every weapon has a story. Every soldier carries weight that doesn't show on any memorial. If you have stories about your service or your father's service or your grandfather's service, share them in the comments below. These stories matter. This history matters. We're losing World War II veterans at a rate of over 100 per day now. Soon there will be no one left who can tell these stories firsthand. That makes what we're doing here, remembering, honoring, keeping these stories alive, it makes it critical. So please like this video, subscribe to this channel, share it with someone who needs to hear it, because John George deserves to be remembered. And so do the 11 Japanese snipers he killed, and the 14 Americans they killed first, and every soldier on both sides who fought and died in wars they didn't start. All of them deserve to be more than forgotten names in dusty archives. Now let me tell you what John George's story really means and why it matters today. So what does John George's story mean? Why does a rifle in a museum case matter in 2025? George's story is about the tension between individual excellence and industrial scale operations. Guadalcanal proved that one skilled man with the right tool can change outcomes. 11 snipers eliminated, 14 American lives avenged, a battalion's morale restored. Burma proved that individual excellence has limits, that modern warfare rewards mass production over craftsmanship, volume of fire over precision. Both truths exist simultaneously, and that tension between valuing individual skill and accepting that sometimes it's not enough, that's still relevant today. George didn't wait for permission, didn't wait for official approval, didn't wait for the army to issue him the right equipment. He bought his own rifle, trained himself, proved its worth when given the chance. That's the American spirit in its purest form. Don't wait for someone to solve your problem, solve it yourself. George never called himself a hero, never sought recognition, never told war stories at parties, because real heroes understand something civilians often don't. Heroism isn't about glory. It's about doing terrible things when necessary and living with the weight afterward. It's about carrying faces you'll never forget, about counting kills in the dark, about wondering if you're proud or ashamed and realizing the answer is both. That's the truth about the greatest generation that we sometimes forget. They didn't fight because they loved war. They fought because they had to. And then they came home and lived quiet lives and didn't talk about it. George spent the second half of his life as a scholar, studying politics, teaching about African independence movements, contributing to understanding post-colonial development, from killing 11 men in 4 days to spending 50 years promoting understanding between cultures. That transformation from warrior to scholar, from taker of life to advocate for peace, that's also the American story. We fight when we must, but we'd rather build, create, understand. The Winchester Model 70 was perfect for one kind of war, obsolete in another. George was exceptional at one kind of combat, irrelevant in another. Both had to adapt, both had to accept that the world moves on. That's the hardest lesson. No matter how good you are, no matter how much you've sacrificed, sometimes you become obsolete. The question is, do you accept that gracefully and find a new purpose? Or do you spend the rest of your life bitter that the world changed? George chose grace, chose adaptation, chose to build a new life when his old skills no longer mattered. That's worth remembering too. Today's veterans face similar challenges: 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan, skills honed in urban combat, counterinsurgency, tribal negotiation. Then the wars end. Those skills, those hard-won experiences, suddenly less relevant. What do you do when the thing you're best at is no longer needed? George's answer: you adapt. You find new purpose, you contribute in new ways. Your service mattered, your sacrifice mattered. The fact that the war is over doesn't change that. John B. George's life teaches us 7 lessons worth remembering. 1, excellence matters, even when the world doesn't recognize it immediately. George's skill saved lives, period. 2, don't wait for permission. If you know what needs to be done and you have the ability to do it, do it. Buy your own rifle if you have to. 3, teach others. George didn't keep his knowledge to himself. He trained 40 men. That knowledge multiplied, 74 more enemies eliminated, 0 friendly casualties, 4 adapt or perish. When Burma proved his rifle was obsolete, George didn't complain. He adapted, he learned, he moved on. 5, carry your weight with dignity. George killed 14 men, trained others who killed 74 more. He never bragged about it, never celebrated it, but he also didn't apologize for doing what was necessary. 6, build something after destruction, from warrior to scholar. From taking life to promoting understanding, that transformation matters. 7, some heroes deserve quiet dignity, not because they weren't heroic, but because they chose humility over recognition. We should honor that choice even as we remember their story. George's Winchester Model 70 changed military thinking. After Guadalcanal, the U.S. military began taking precision marksmanship seriously, began developing formal sniper programs, began recognizing that sometimes one skilled shooter is worth a dozen average riflemen. That legacy continues today. U.S. military snipers are the finest in the world. Their training, their equipment, their doctrine all build on lessons learned by men like George. But George's real legacy isn't military doctrine, it's personal. It's the idea that ordinary Americans can do extraordinary things when circumstances demand it. George wasn't special forces, wasn't elite military. He was a farm boy from Illinois who learned to shoot hunting rabbits, won a state championship, and bought a rifle with his own money. Then, when his country needed him, he did what needed to be done. That's the American story. Not superheroes, not chosen ones, just regular people who step up when the moment requires it. If your grandfather served in World War II and never talked about it, if your father came back from Vietnam, different, and you never understood why, if your son or daughter deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan and carries weight, you can't see John George's story helps explain why. Because the things that make someone a hero in war, the ability to kill efficiently, to make hard decisions, to live with the consequences, those aren't things you brag about at Thanksgiving dinner. Real heroes carry their weight quietly, and we honor them by understanding that their silence isn't weakness, it's strength. Back to the National Firearms Museum. Display case 47. The Winchester Model 70 sits there, silent, still, forgotten by most. But if you look closely, really look, you can see the story, the 11 notches carved into the stock, one for each confirmed kill on Guadalcanal, the wear patterns on the barrel from George's hands, thousands of hours of cleaning, maintaining, trusting this tool with his life, the Lyman Alaskan scope. 2.5 times magnification, primitive by today's standards, perfect for 1943. The lighter Weaver scope George added for Burma, now displayed beside the rifle. Evidence of adaptation. This isn't just a rifle, it's a time capsule, a memorial, a teacher. Imagine being George at 9:17 a.m. on January 22nd, 1943. 27 years old, farm boy, state champion, looking through that scope at a man you're about to kill, knowing your fellow officers think your rifle is a joke, knowing 14 Americans are dead because you haven't stopped these snipers yet, knowing that in 7 seconds you'll cross a line you can never uncross, and pulling the trigger anyway. That's courage, real courage, not the Hollywood kind, not the kind that gets parades, the quiet kind, the kind that keeps you up at night for the next 66 years, the kind that makes you a scholar instead of a soldier because you've seen enough death for one lifetime, the kind that makes you donate your rifle to a museum so the story doesn't die with you, even though you never wanted to be the story in the first place. We owe the John Georges of the world something. We owe them memory, not worship, not pity, just memory. We owe them the understanding that freedom isn't free, but the men who pay for it often pay in ways we never see. We owe them the promise to be worthy of their sacrifice, to build the country they fought for, to preserve the values they believed in. What values did George fight for? Not empire, not conquest, not domination, freedom, dignity. The idea that human life has worth, the idea that tyranny, whether from Nazi Germany or Imperial Japan, must be opposed, the idea that ordinary Americans given the chance can do extraordinary things. Those values are worth preserving. Not because America is perfect, we're not, but because those ideals, freedom, dignity, opportunity, they're worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for. George knew that, proved it, then lived it for 66 more years. The Winchester sits in its case. Most days, hundreds of people walk past. They see an old rifle, a relic, a piece of history that doesn't connect to their lives. But every so often, maybe once a week, maybe once a month, a veteran stops, reads the placard, sees the notches, understands, and for just a moment, John George isn't forgotten anymore. For just a moment, that sacrifice, those 11 kills, that quiet dignity, that lifetime of carrying weight, it's remembered, and that's enough. That has to be enough. Because the alternative, forgetting entirely, that would be the real tragedy. John B. George died on January 3rd, 2009, at age 94. His obituary focused on his scholarly work, his contributions to African political science, his decades of service to understanding post-colonial development. It mentioned Guadalcanal in one sentence. Most people who knew him had no idea what he'd done in 1943, and George liked it that way because real heroes don't need recognition. They just need to know their sacrifice mattered. But here's the thing, their sacrifice did matter. George's 11 kills saved American lives. His training section saved more. His book taught generations of soldiers, and his choice to adapt from warrior to scholar that showed that there's life after war, purpose after trauma, peace after violence. That's the story we need to remember. So here's what I'm asking you to do. 1, hit that like button right now. Help this story reach more people. 2, subscribe to this channel. We're sharing forgotten stories like this every week. 3, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. A veteran, a family member, anyone who believes that regular people can do extraordinary things. 4, leave a comment. Tell us your story, your grandfather's story, your story. These connections matter. 5, If you're ever near Fairfax, Virginia, go to the National Firearms Museum, find display case 47, look at that Winchester Model 70, and remember John George. Remember that heroes carry their medals quietly, they carry their memories with dignity, and the best ones carry both without ever asking for recognition. The mail order rifle that won a war, the farm boy who became a legend and then became a scholar, the faces he saw through a scope that he never forgot. This is their story. And as long as we remember, they're not really gone. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. And thank you for making sure that John B. George and the thousands like him don't disappear into silence.